Kinship Studies in India. The famous Cambridge anthropologist W.H.R. Rivers, speaking on his favorite theme, the importance of the study of kinship and marriage to the development of Indian sociology, said, "We have material which would make volumes on ritual and religious beliefs for every page devoted to records of kinship and of the social as opposed to the religious aspect of marriage." The statement reiterates Rivers' overall project to bring the study of kinship and marriage, what he termed social organization, back to the center stage of anthropological theory and sociological research. In the first place, he argued, there are certain social practices which are peculiar to India and which still need to be adequately documented to complete the record of the variety of human institutions. Rivers was thinking in particular of the marriage practice termed hypergamy, whereby men of social groups of high rank take wives from groups of lower rank but do not give their women in return. Secondly, there are customs which are found elsewhere in the world but which exist in India in an especially well articulated form, polyandry for instance. Thirdly, India shares customs such as cross-cousin marriage with many other culture regions, enabling the development of a comparative perspective on these practices. And finally, kinship data from India's more primitive communities may provide material for the reconstruction of a past history of human institutions in the region, like Rivers' work with Melanesian society. River fully expected that filling out the ethnographic map of Indian kinship and marriage would at the same time dialectically enrich and strengthen comparative sociological theory. Herewith, we will also attempt a similar understanding. We will consider first how professional priorities and interests have shaped, even governed, studies of family, kinship and marriage in India. Up to the early 1970s, we refer to Leela Dubé's very useful survey of the state of family and kinship studies in India in 1974. We must consider the way in which Indian ethnography has mediated major theoretical controversies in the social sciences in general and in the domain of family and kinship studies in particular. The overall intention is to give a more dialogical, ethno-sociological twist to the current context. In the 1960s, T.N. Madan and Rivers lamented the neglect to kinship studies by students of Indian sociology. But the situation was beginning to change. In 1953 and then in 1965, Airavati Karve's encyclopedic survey of kinship organization in India suggested criteria for constructing a kinship of the South Asian region. Then, there were also some monographic field studies of Indian family life. Srinivas's description of the Coorg localized lineage, Mayer's study of the internal and external relations of caste in central India, Dumont's detailed account of the social organization and material culture of a South Indian subcaste, Louis Dumont applying alliance theory, study of Dravidian kinship terminologies and marriage rules, Kathleen Gou's paper redefining the institution of marriage. Scholars also attempted systematic descriptions of some distinctive features of Indian kinship systems, for instance, high-end variations in kinship practices and hypergamous marriage alliances. Madan's own study initiated new perspectives of the Indian family place and the Indological book view approach. The earlier method of looking at kinship as exotic gave way now to a more functionalist understanding of such institutions in specific social, economic and ecological contexts. Family studies in India in this century have followed and reflected the changing paradigm concerns of anthropology and sociology as in the West. This is to say that there has been progression through evolutionist, diffusionist, functionalist, structuralist orientations, and the plurality of perspectives imported from Marxist and feminist theory. Several specific developments in family and kinship studies since the 1950s are briefly highlighted here. The first of these, and surely the most significant also, the attempt to reinterpret Indian kinship from the point of view articulated by Levi-Strauss. In this perspective, the concern was with the constitution and functioning of unilineal descent groups. The major force here, and his influence extends well beyond the domain of kinship, was the French sociologist Louis Dumont. Through his theoretical and empirical contributions, the understanding of hierarchy and marriage alliance in South Indian kinship, and through provocative conceptual statements in the early issues of the journal Contributions to Indian Sociology, which he had jointly founded, Dumont introduced a completely new dimension in the discursive domain of family and kinship studies in India. Another notable influence has been derived from David Snyder's cultural approach to family and kinship, initially applied in respect to the American family. In this framework, the domain of kinship was itself problematized as an artifact of anthropological theory and practice more than an essence in itself. Scholars of this orientation seek first to understand indigenous ideas of relatedness, what Snyder had called the code and the substance of kinship relations in the native system of ideas. Contemporary theorists of the household have now conceded that people's ideas, norms, and values concerning their domestic life are an important constraint on their behavior, and a number of writings have sought to reintegrate the ideological and the pragmatic, the qualitative and the quantitative aspects of family life. In another significant development in reference to the household dimension of the family, there has been a conspicuous shift from the earlier preoccupation with household morphology to an interest in the political economy of the household unit, how it actually functions as a unit of production, reproduction, and consumption in the wider society. For our better understanding, we will now look in detail to Airavati Karve's Kinship Map of India. According to Airavati Karve, three things are absolutely necessary for the understanding of cultural phenomenon in India. These are the configuration of linguistic regions, the institution of caste, and the family organization. Each of these three factors is intimately bound up with the other two, and the three together give meaning and supply basis to all other aspects of Indian culture. A language area is one in which several languages belonging to one language family are spoken. The linguistic regions possess a certain homogeneity of cultural traits and kinship organization. The common language makes communication easy, sets the limits of marital connections, and confines kinship mostly within the language region. Common folk songs and common literature characterize such an area. This was inevitable, as large numbers of people were illiterate and literary traditions were transmitted orally. Airavati Karve has presented the kinship organizations in a geographical sequence of northern, central, southern, and eastern zones. This procedure was adopted deliberately to emphasize the spatial pattern and interrelation of the kinship organization and linguistic divisions. Since the geographical distribution of different language families in India is well known, here it has been only tried to relate this configuration with another cultural phenomenon, the kinship organization. The kinship organization follows the linguistic pattern roughly. In some aspects, language and kinship patterns do not go hand in hand. Though the Maharashtra region belongs to the area of Sanskritic languages, its kinship organization is to a large extent modeled on that of the Dravidian South, its southern neighbor. The Dravidian North, on the other hand, has been affected to a large extent by its northern neighbors speaking Sanskritic languages. It is not the people of Karnataka and Andhra alone whose literature has been saturated with Sanskrit words and Sanskrit epics, who use some northern kinship terms, but also the Oraons and the Gonds, the primitive jungle folk who live within the northern linguistic area and have kinship vocabularies which show over 50% of words borrowed from Sanskritic languages. Therefore, the researcher has presented the kinship material in geographical divisions which are easy to understand, particularly after they are brought into relationship with the language areas of India. We will now be understanding kinship patterns, family dynamics and cultural norms as described region-wise by Airavati Karve. First, we will look at the northern zone. The northern zone comprises that part of India which lies between the Himalayas to the north and the Vindhya regions to the south. Linguistically, it is the northern half of the language area where languages derived from Sanskrit are spoken by a large majority of the people. The states, the administrative units included in this area are Sindh, now a part of West Pakistan, Punjab, West Punjab is now part of West Pakistan, Kashmir, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, part of Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Bengal, Assam and the independent kingdom of Nepal. The languages spoken are Sindhi, Punjabi, Kashmiri, Hindi, Bihari, Bengali, Assami and Nepali. In the northern zone, kinship behavior changes slightly from region to region and within each region from caste to caste. The study of these differences is very fruitful for the understanding of the social structure of each region, but one needs a certain norm for undertaking a comparative study. The following sketch attempts to give such a norm, giving an ideal northern pattern by referring to practices and attitudes found most commonly among a majority of the castes in the northern zone. The Gotra and the clan systems. There are certain groups in India whose social prestige makes others copy their institutions, at least in name. The two most important groups have been, since very ancient times, the Brahmin and the Kshatriyas. The Gotra system of the Brahmins is somewhat like the clan system of the non-Aryans. This Gotra system was written down and made into a system which applied to all Brahmins and was copied by many other castes. The castes which claim to be Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, who are traders, have social divisions possessing Gotras. There is, however, no caste in India besides the Brahmins which possesses the elaborate description in the Gotra organization. Many lower castes also have Gotras, and even primitive groups talk of their clans as Gotra. Hypergamy and Kulinism. The tendency towards hypergamous stratification is found among all caste clusters. The Brahmins, for example, are generally roughly divided into those who do not have to earn their living by officiating at domestic rituals and those who do it for a living. The former generally own land and engage in literary studies. The latter are family priests or priests officiating at holy places when people take their baths in the holy rivers or offer worship. They are held to be rather lower in status than the family priests. Among the priests at holy places, those who officiate at funeral rites hold again a position lower than those who officiate at auspicious ceremonies. In Banaras, Mathura, Ayodhya, Gaya, Nasik, Rameshwaram and all over India, in the sacred places, there are these Brahmins who are generally well off but are held to belong to a very low status among the Brahmins. The Brahmins of each of these divisions marry only among themselves, but may sometimes receive a bride from a slightly lower division, but not from a division many steps lower than their own. The custom according to which a man marries a girl belonging to the same division or to one which is only of a slightly lower status has resulted in a phenomenon called Kulinism in Bengal. There are many castes which claim to be either Kayastha or Vaishya, and these are generally endogamous. Among the Kshatriyas, there is a fairly well established hypergamy, but the best examples of hypergamy are found in the central zone among the Rajputs and the Marathas. The Rajput clans of the north follow the customs of the Rajputs of the central zone. Rules of marriage. The organization of the family is essentially similar throughout northern India, and most of the castes conform to the same base pattern, which has its roots in the Indo-Aryan patriarchal family. It is therefore not surprising to find that the marriage regulations are based mainly on considerations of consanguinity. The ancient rule of avoiding marriage with somebody who is removed by less than 7 degrees from the father and 5 degrees from the mother is quoted by all castes from the highest to the lowest. The actual rule of marriage is, however, that a person must not marry in his patri family, which can be called the patri clan in some cases, and must also avoid marriage with the children of his mother's siblings and cousins, and with the children of his father's sisters and the children of his father's female cousins. This rule is the same as the one which was in vogue in ancient northern India. In almost all castes in the northern zone, the marriage of cousins removed even by 2 or 3 degrees is viewed with great disfavor, though a few cases occur as exceptions. This rule is elaborated in different ways in different communities. Spatial and geographical limits of endogamy and exogamy. If a daughter is given into a certain family of a certain village, a second daughter is generally not given into the same family or village in that generation, and owing to the taboos mentioned above, not in the next 2 generations at least. Also, there is a prejudice against exchanging daughters. A record of Rajput marriages over areas in the north show that western villages provide grooms while the eastern villages provide brides, and that there is a direction in the transaction or circulation of women. Not only is the family which gives a daughter in marriage supposed to have a status inferior to the family which receives a daughter, but even a village which gives a daughter is inferior in status to a village which receives one. There is thus a wider and wider circle for seeking marital alliances, but there is always an outer limit for this expansion, which is different for each caste. This region of endogamy may comprise from a few administrative districts to a whole linguistic region. This limitation of the field for marriage is due to the fear that the bride or groom of a distant village, though professing to belong to the same caste as one's own, may be inferior in some ways. Therefore, one gives daughters in marriage to families with whom old affinal relations of one's own family or of one's affinal families can be established. The consciousness of caste status keeps marriage territorially and genealogically within a group which from old times is established as an affinal group, while the taboos on the marriage of near kin and the prescription of local exogamy tend to spread the affinal group over a comparatively large area and to include a considerable number of families within it. Daughters versus brides. In India, marriage is a sacrament, and no normal man or woman must die without receiving this sacrament. To be childless is frowned upon. Earlier, girls and boys were generally married when they were but children. The bride was not finally sent to the groom's house until she reached puberty. Till that time, she goes to her parents-in-law's house for a few days as a guest. Levirate, polygyny and remarriage. Though the system of levirate marriage of a widow to the husband's brother is found among a large number of castes, it has not the sanction of the traditional Brahmanic religion. The most powerful motive for polygyny, besides the display of social status and wealth, is the desire for male progeny. Not only does a man marry again if the first wife proves barren, but the author has known cases in which the first wife insists on a second marriage of her husband in order that children be born in the house. All over India, the words for marriage are always different from the words for widow marriage. Roles in a joint family. The behavior pattern of the kin group in the northern family is like that of the patri family in ancient India. The man lives with his patri kin, among whom he is born and reared. He comes in contact with his wife's relations, but very rarely. The woman, on the other hand, spends her life, except for the few childhood years, with her affinal kin, with whom she is not acquainted up to the moment of her marriage. Definite patterns are set up for her behavior with these relations. Towards the younger brother of her husband, her behavior is more free and she may joke with him. A bride, however, should be neither seen too much except when working, nor heard too much. Only when she becomes a mother can she be a little freer. But only when the mother-in-law is old or dead does a woman have freedom of speech and behavior. If the husband died when the bride is but young, she is branded as an inauspicious woman and she suffers a lot. The northern joint family is a status group where husband, wife, parents-in-law, daughters-in-law, sons, daughter, sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law have each a definite place assigned to him or her vis-a-vis all the others. The work which each has to do, the pleasures each will enjoy, are more or less fixed by convention, and the important thing one has to learn are these conventions of kinship behavior. A man behaves in a deferential manner to all elder relatives of his wife and jokes with her younger brothers and sisters. A man may marry the younger sister of his wife during the lifetime of his wife or after her death. In the north, the woman's sphere is much more isolated from that of the men than in the south, and this is due to the fact that the family is not only patrilineally oriented but dominated by the patri kin, and girls are always given in marriage to people with whom they are not acquainted. The southern patrilineal families, on the other hand, prefer marriage of cousins so that the orientation is not entirely patrilocal. There are also single family units of husband, wife and children based on the Western model. In such families, the wife has a position of responsibility and respect, but in a majority of cases, it is not a true single family because it has economic and ritual ties with a larger patri family whose member the husband is. In this region, the northern family is thus a continuation of the family of the ancient times with slight modifications. It is patrilineal, patrilocal and patriarchal. Marriage is generally outside of the kin group and the local group. It is a joint family in which the brides are all brought from outside and the girls are all given away. The behavior is strictly regulated according to generations, according to whether one is born in the family or married into the family, and finally according to whether one is a man or a woman. Customs like levirate and sororate, by which a widow lives with the younger brother of her husband and a man married the younger sister of his wife, show that marriage is very much a relationship between two families rather than between two individuals. The giving and receiving of gifts also reflect the familial aspect rather than the individual aspect of the transaction. We will be looking at similar descriptions of the central, southern and eastern zone in the next module. Thank you.